Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to episode 40 of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and we have an amazing guest with us this week who's going to share her immense expertise on how we as leaders can deal with two pretty common issues that often come up, which are imposter syndrome and burnout. Now, if you aren't familiar with one or both of those, don't worry. We'll get into what they are, how to recognize them, and of course, how to deal with them. So let me tell you a little bit about my guest. Her name is Dr. Lizette Ojeda. She is a tenured associate professor at Texas A&M University, where she trains budding psychologists on evidence-based best practices for career counseling. As a behavioral scientist, she is nationally recognized for her work published in scientific outlets such as Journal of Career Development, the Encyclopedia of Positive Psychology, and the Handbook of Career Counseling for Women. She also serves on the editorial board of Journal of Career Assessment, which is really a big deal. If you're not in the academic world, being on the editorial board of one of those journals is really a big deal. I just want to plug that extra right there. And in addition to all that, she is a workplace diversity and well-being consultant. She specializes in helping diverse leaders achieve their next level of success with more confidence and less stress. Welcome, Dr. Lizette. It is so great to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you, Alex.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I love your work. I love the areas that you really focus on, and they're just so relevant to our audience, which of course are leaders, business owners, C-suite execs, and I know we're going to have an awesome conversation today. So just to get us started, and I ask all our guests this question, what does positive leadership mean to you? Tell us a little bit about where you're coming from when you think about positive leadership.
Yeah, so when I think about positive leadership, I think of leadership from the inside out. So I really believe that leadership starts with yourself, and that requires you to be really self-aware of your vision for success, your vision for how you want to lead, how you want to show up in this world as a leader. And one of the things that's really ideal to be able to do that is to get really clear on what your strengths are and to leverage them, to lead using what you're already amazing at, and to empower others to do the same.
I love that. I absolutely love it. And it fits so perfectly, right? And I know because you are a professor, because you're evidence-based, and I am too. Well, I'm not a professor, but I am evidence-based. All of what you're describing is all borne out in the research, right? I mean, we talk about this on the show a lot, right? Like one of the keys that we see over and over in the research is that need to be self-aware and to know our strengths and to know how to use them optimally, right? Not just, okay, I have these strengths, I'm just going to use them like I've got a hammer and a nail, right? But knowing when to contextually use them and how to, sometimes we have to dial it back. Sometimes we have to dial it up, right? But the only way we know that is if we are self-aware as leaders in terms of, as you said, what we want, but also how we're impacting all the people around us that we're leading, right?
For sure. And I'm so glad that you pointed out the importance of context, because we don't function in a vacuum where it's one size fits all. You might need to show up as a leader differently depending on who you are leading. It looks differently at home, it looks differently with yourself, and it looks differently with your team.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the issues, I think, that really it's pretty common for leaders because, and I think again, the research shows this, right? That imposter syndrome, what we mentioned at the beginning of the show, it almost shows up the more self-aware we are, and the more successful we are, imposter syndrome seems to show up even more. And so it's very common in leaders to deal with imposter syndrome and also burnout, which we'll get to in a moment. But let's talk about imposter syndrome first. So tell us a little bit, so everybody's on the same page, like what exactly is it and how do I know if I have it?
Yes. So 70% of people is what the research suggests is how many people have experienced an imposter phenomenon is what they call it in the literature. Imposter syndrome is more in the day-to-day colloquial language that is
Sure.
used. And so it's a lot of people.
Yeah. 70%,
Yeah.
that's a pretty big majority.
Yeah,
Yes.
at some point in our life. And the other interesting thing about that is that we used to think that it was just something that affected women, but that's not the case. It actually does affect men as well. And you're right. The more successful we are, the more susceptible we become to feeling like a fraud. And imposter syndrome is really, a difficulty internalizing our successes and assuming that we are where we are because of luck, because of somebody who threw us a bone and we know somebody in high places, or anything else other than because we know our stuff. And there comes this fear of, well, can I sustain this? Is somebody going to come in and tell me that actually we made a mistake? You don't have what it takes to be in this position. And so it's these internal struggles of feeling like, well, maybe I'm not as good as I thought. And the interesting thing about that is that the more successful you are, the more you feel this way. And you would think that your self-efficacy, your confidence would be built high enough to where you are protected against this. But here's the thing, because you become more successful, guess what? Other people around you are also going to be pretty successful too. And I always tell my clients that you only have a front row seat to their performance. You don't have a backstage pass to all their challenges, their struggles. We only see what's going well. And so because we only see what's going well with other people, we assume we're the only ones who are struggling because we know what our challenges are. Other people don't talk about it that much.
Yes. Ain't that the truth? It's comparing to the highlight reel, right? So exactly. We have all these internal things we're struggling with. We've had our own challenges, and we look at other people and think, wow, she's amazing. How did she get to be so amazing? It's like, I think there is a comparison piece that comes into that whole imposter syndrome. I'm not good enough feeling too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it holds us back in so many different ways, like not going after something that you want because fear of failure comes into the picture. And so if that fear is more intense than the desire to have what it is that you want, it's going to keep you playing small and not allowing you to step outside of your comfort zone. And so you really have to redefine what potential failure means to you, looking at it like a lesson learned rather than indicative of you not having what it takes. And here's where you have to be really clear on your strengths, because if you feel really good about certain things, it will be easier for you to bounce back from things that didn't turn out as planned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just share, a little bit of a couple of moments of vulnerability. I'll share my own personal journey with imposter syndrome, because I feel like I have it as a passenger, like I've had it my whole professional life. So even if I go back 20 years to my first position I had in a very large corporation, and I'll never forget this. There was this beautiful, huge conference room. And I worked for a media company. So there was an editorial meeting every day. And not everybody got to attend. But my boss asked me to go in with her, and the main people all sat around the table, and the support people and the lower level people all sat against the wall, right off the table. And of course I was against the wall, but I was looking around the room the whole time going, oh, how am I here? Like, look at all these people, this is amazing, how did I even get here? Someone's going to ask me to leave soon. And, the funny thing is that was very early on in my tenure at that company. And over time, as I got to know those various people, first of all, on the periphery of the room, but then the people around the table, I started to realize, oh, you're humans too. Okay, I do belong here. Like, I get it. Like, we're working together. Like, I have something to bring to the table. So I had it even back then. But then you fast forward 20 years, and now I have a 20-year career. I've been a partner in a research firm. I have my own research consulting firm now. And sometimes it still rears its ugly head. I'll have a brand new client come in, and because I haven't worked with them before, there's like this little voice, my little imposter syndrome voice, that goes, wow, I don't know if you'll be good enough. I mean, why did they come to you? They could have gone to someone else. How are you going to make sure that you're doing absolute best work? What if they don't like you? Blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's just crazy. And yet it's like, hey, I have 20 years of experience. I have success behind me, and I'm still dealing with imposter syndrome.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. I totally get that. I experience that as well. And I'll be honest, whenever I hear people, read out my bio, I'm like, is that really me? Like,
Right.
Because it sounds like it sounds amazing, to be honest. But, I specialize in diversity and leadership, and it's very personal to me because I'm a child of Mexican immigrants who didn't even go to high school.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an extra dosage of imposter syndrome that I have carried with me for a long time, because I don't see a lot of people who look like me as I keep going up the ladder in my career. And so
right.
There's also that intellectual piece, but there's also the cultural piece that do I belong here? I have to work twice as hard to prove that I deserve to be here, because maybe people already have some assumptions about me unconsciously, right? Maybe not intentionally, but unconsciously. We all have that. And so, yeah, I totally get that.
And isn't that kind of the sad irony of where we are with this whole diversity conversation, in the sense that your story is even more incredible because of your background, because you're like the first in your family to not just go to college, but go on to become a college professor. I mean, that's really impressive for anybody to become a college professor. But from where you came from, that's even more impressive. Yet, in a way, it's like you're not able to fully own that story because you feel like you constantly have to somehow be better, like be doubly impressive than, say, the regular white person who, became a college professor, right? It's like, there's really kind of a tragic irony to that, I think.
Yeah, it is. And, I specialize in diversity, especially in STEM, where it's, you don't have enough women, enough people of color. And so when you're in environments where you're not represented enough, especially as you step up into leadership, it's, I hear a lot about the recruitment, like we got to recruit more diversity, but what happens after you recruit? You have to retain, and retain is not enough. You have to help them feel part of the environment, like they belong, and that their opinion matters, their contribution matters. And so it's about developing and promoting them. Right. There's just so much that we can talk about this, but like imposter syndrome is such a big deal, especially when you have a background where you're one of the onlys to have gotten to where you are, and you currently are one of the onlys represented in your position.
Exactly. So tell us, I mean, is there any, is there any relief on the horizon? Like does imposter syndrome ever go away? Or is it just like a little passenger who is constantly along for the road trip and I just somehow have to learn how to deal with it? Like what becomes of it? How can we, manage it if we have to constantly know that it's going to be there?
Yes, that's a great question. What I'm finding is that the level of frequency, intensity, and severity should decrease if you learn how to deal with this effectively. So it's still going to creep up, especially if you are challenging yourself to continue to grow.
Right.
If you're stagnant, if maybe there's some complacency, it's not going to pop up as much. But when you're constantly stretching and seeing what you're really made of and testing yourself, it's going to pop up. But the goal is not to be fearless, it's to fear less. You're setting yourself up for failure if you expect to be fearless. I see a lot of those, on social media, I'm fearless, and I'm like, unless you're a sociopath, maybe.
Right. And it's not that smart to be fearless. Okay. There are things that we should actually fear. I mean, there's a reason that we're evolutionarily programmed to pay more attention to the negative, right? It's like, no, there's certain things that we should fear and we should be mindful of. Doesn't mean that we necessarily don't deal with them or go do something, but we need to exercise some level of caution at times.
Exactly. It's kind of like stress is a bell curve. Too little stress, you're going to not perform well enough. Too much stress, you're going to have some performance anxiety. So it has to be just enough of a dose to keep you on your toes. But yeah, so it's being really mindful of when it pops up and dealing with it in a way that is going to help tame it down, so that the frequency, the intensity, and the severity in terms of the impact that it has on you and how it holds you back is decreased. And things like restructuring your thoughts, being more mindful of your physiological reactions, being able to tell where it's showing up. Some people get flustered, a little red on their chest. And so they get some telltale signs of when that's popping up. And so when you're aware of when that's showing up for you, then you're better able to address it.
Yes. Oh, well, yes. And here again, back to self-awareness, right? Like being aware of what's happening is almost like half the battle right there, because it's like, okay, now I have a choice. I can just let it run rampant, or I can deal with it in a constructive way, but I'm registering that it's there and that I can do something. So, like, give us like a tip. You said, be mindful, certainly to tune into like the physiological reactions, because our emotions are very much physiological and they can tell us a lot about what's going on. So let's say I am feeling that, like for me, it'll often show up as like tightness in my chest, or maybe I'll get what I call bad butterflies in my tummy, right? We all have butterflies. We know what those are. Sometimes they're wonderful. You're so excited to see your loved one, but there's also bad butterflies, at least in my world. So I get those two physiological feelings a lot. And I know when I do, those are signals. I've got to deal with that. And I know how I do, but I want to hear from your research and what you found. Like, what do you do next once you have recognized that, okay, some fear is coming in or some imposter syndrome is happening? Like, what do I do now?
For sure. So imagine you're about to go into a really important meeting. There are a lot of decision makers there, and it's very high stakes. And so you might feel really anxious. And so the first thing that I want you to do is to notice that it's there. Don't try to push it away, acknowledge it, and then take control over it by doing some really simple things like deep breathing. And people underestimate the power of that. But you know what it is? It's telling your body that you're safe. There's no saber-toothed tiger coming to chase you.
Right.
Let's calm your body down so you're not in fight or flight or freeze mode.
Yep.
And it really just does wonders. And the thing is that a lot of times people don't realize how simple it could be because we're constantly on the go. And so taking some time to have these types of tools in your tool belt that you can have access to at any time. But if you don't know that they're accessible, you're not going to use them. So that's one way, is to first calm yourself down physiologically, and then also to have something that you can say to yourself that is going to give you a boost of confidence in the moment. And that's why it's really important to be clear on your strengths.
Yes.
And so how can you leverage it going into the current situation that's producing some anxiety, that is making you doubt whether you really have a place here or not? And so, and then also your power pose is really effective. You know, do a little superhero pose and put your shoulders back and your head up high, and just, people say fake it till you make it. I prefer to think of it as live as if, and then you will. So live as if you are already being the person that is going to be on the other side, coming out of this meeting exactly the way you wanted it to be. Already visualize that, feel it, involve all your senses as much as possible. Who will you be sharing this with? How will you be feeling? What will you be doing? How will this be affecting you? How will it feel? How would you celebrate?
Yeah.
And here's the thing: people tell me, "Oh, well, isn't that setting myself up for failure? Like, I'm getting my hopes up really high, and what if it doesn't work out?" And what I have to say to that is, you get to decide what story you make up. We don't know. Unless you are psychic, we don't really know what's going to happen. So you either can make up a positive story that goes the way you want it, and already build up that energy and that confidence within yourself that is then going to show up as energy that is going to be magnifying, captivating, contagious. Or you can already put up a wall and expect the worst, and people are going to be able to tell that something is off. It's just our instincts from thousands of years ago that tell us something isn't safe here. And even if you don't say it with words, your body language will reveal that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love all of those tips. I absolutely love them. And I think I would just add to that last one that you mentioned about, like, I just love your reframing of fake it till you make it. Cause I get that and it does work, but I've always kind of hated that phraseology as well. So to talk about it, think of it as if, like, act as if I already was there. And, to your point, well, when people say, yeah, but what if I pretend all that and I fall flat on my face? And I would say to that also, like, so what? I mean, because when we feel good about ourselves, right? We know this from self-efficacy theory. We know it from the broaden and build theory, right? When we feel good and capable, and to your point, we know our strengths, we actually perform better. So you're setting yourself up to be able to perform better. And even if there is some kind of failure, well, guess what? It's a learning opportunity. There's really no failures. There is no saber-toothed tiger. So you walk into the room, it's full of C-level execs, it's high stakes, you're anxious, maybe you screw something up, but like, what is the absolute worst that can happen? I mean, it is highly unlikely that you're going to lose your job over one meeting, unless something really, 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 really bad happens, right? Mm-hmm. But I mean, the stakes are not, our lizard brain thinks that the tiger is going to come eat us, but that's not really the reality. It's like, even if we have a moment where we stumble, the consequences are usually not that great, and it's an opportunity for us to learn and build more, right?
Exactly. And the other thing to that is, if you're already expecting the worst, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yes. You're going to get more of what you expect. And so if you are already coming in very confident in yourself, guess what? You're going to be able to bounce back faster, easier, from potential failure, quote unquote, and you're going to be able to problem solve more effectively, especially in the spot, instead of feeling defeated.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love it. You're just so many great tips and actionable ways for people to deal with this. So, okay, so let's talk briefly, because I want to be mindful of time, and I want to make sure I get all your amazing expertise, as much as I can get of it, that is. I mean, I know you've got way more than we have time to cover in the show, but Talk about burnout for a moment, because that is, another classic issue that I think, lots of people deal with it, but particularly leaders, because when you're at the top, when you're leading, it can be a lonely place, and you can feel like people just constantly want stuff from you, right? Like they're coming at you, you're dealing with problems. Sometimes it feels like nothing's going right, and it can become so draining, right? Like the whole thing can really take its toll. And I'm no stranger to burnout either. I've experienced imposter syndrome. Like I said, I still do. I actually had a experience back in 2004 with a lot of burnout. And, now though, I have more tools to sort of recognize when it might be on the horizon and how to actually stop myself from getting there. And I constantly always wish that like leaders have that, because we don't want to see people burn out. We want to see them, as you said, continue to play to their strengths, perform at their best, enjoy what they're doing, be engaged. So tell us a little bit about burnout. Like, what are the signs? How would I know if I'm burned out, or I'm kind of on the highway, I'm on the road to it if I don't start changing something?
Yes. So it's not too long ago that the World Health Organization finally recognized burnout as an actual condition. It's not a disorder, but it's finally being recognized for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, it was difficult to distinguish it between anxiety and depression. But burnout is really, it's a gradual process that where you start to feel worn out excessively. You have begun to check out your things that you used to enjoy, not so much.
Right.
You zone out. You start to have self-doubt, making little mistakes, and it just spirals out of control. And so being aware of, have you gotten to a point where you're not just physically exhausted, but emotionally exhausted? You're short. Take it out on the dog, or maybe a little bit more irritable. Without being stereotypical, men and women tend to show this in a bit of a different way, in terms of the aggressive piece, right? Being more short, maybe you're in your emails, people asking you, is everything okay? Something, you seem like you're upset. So when you start to get those kind of comments, and maybe from at home where it's safer, right? If your team might not feel comfortable being able to tell you that.
Right.
And so this is why it's so important to have a support system and not be the only person leading others, but to have a sounding board where you can check in, and they can also point out to you, you seem like you're a bit less engaged, more short, you're showing up late more often, making some, careless mistakes that weren't typical. These are all red flags that you are burnt out. So decreased engagement, increased illnesses, getting sick more often, staying sick longer, difficulty sleeping, having interpersonal problems, relationship problems, everything feeling like it's a big deal. So not being able to deal with things effectively without, like the straw that broke the camel's back sort of thing.
Yeah.
And not having the tools to be able to deal with it effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when I was going through it, I was so cynical, and
yes.
Kind of what you, and I didn't like myself for it, because I used to love what I do. And now I was starting to really kind of hate it. And like you said, you really pinpointed at least part of my experience, which was little things seemed so demanding, right? Like clients would email and say, hey, can you send me that, study back from 2 years ago? And I'd be like, oh, seriously? I have to now go dig up your stuff for you? It was such a simple ask. It's a totally normal and respectable, well within, decency to ask me to do that. But I would be seeing things like this as just like, just such a source of annoyance. Like, why are these people constantly bugging me? And, you know, I look back at it now and I feel so bad because, hey, they were my clients and I genuinely liked them. I genuinely enjoyed doing, you know, working with them. But somehow just, I didn't have for me, it was very much about boundaries. Like, I did not have boundaries in place. And so I just felt like constantly people were just pulling from me, trying to get more from me. And I didn't have any more to give. I felt like my back was against the wall and they were still coming. And it was like, what do you want from me? My blood? Like, I got nothing else to give you, you know? So tell us, you know, if someone is feeling any of these, you know, symptoms or things that are showing up for them, what do you do about burnout? I mean, if some of these things are beginning to happen or you're already deep in it, like, what can we do there?
Yeah, there's so many things that you can do. And I think the best place to start is to get clear on what all do you have going on. Write everything down in different areas of your life. Financial commitments, personal commitments, different aspects of work and all the work projects that you have going on. Just dump it all on paper, get it all out of your head, which really, it's just causing more chaos in your mind because it's all over the place.
Yes.
You start to think about different things at the same time. You're writing an email, but you're also thinking about what's for dinner. And so just get it all out of your head, put it all on paper so you can see it, and also allows you to separate yourself from it, look at it in a more objective way rather than it feeling overwhelming, and start to do a couple things. I'm a productivity junkie, so figure out what needs to be deleted, what you have no business worrying about. It just doesn't need to be done by anybody. Delete, defer what just doesn't need to be done now. Because it's not a priority, it's not urgent, it's not that important. What needs to be delegated? So what can somebody else do? A lot of times, especially if you're more of a perfectionistic or like to have control, you think it's easier just for you to get it done. And, you know, it does take some time to train somebody to do it, right? But it's an upfront investment for a long-term return in your time investment.
Exactly.
And so if you have a bunch of instances where you're like, oh, well, it's just easier for me to do it. It's just easier for me to do it. That adds up. So delegate, ask for help. What else? And then what are some things that you just need to do? Right?
Like what really is the priority?
Exactly.
Instead of feeling like everything and everyone's a priority, what is the actual priority?
Yes. And the other thing is, I get it. You know, there are a lot of things that we have to do. Leadership is not easy. There's a lot of responsibilities. So I like to take it a step further and say, okay, now you've got these core 3, maybe 5 top things that you really need to focus, get clear on who needs to do what. And when it comes to what you need to do, ask yourself, what do I need to give my absolute 100% to? And what can I get away with like a C? I don't need to be an A-star student, because here's the thing, you cannot give 100% to 100 things all at the same time. And so being strategic and intentional about where your energy and your effort and your time really matters the most. Kind of like the 80-20 principle.
Yes, exactly. And I'm curious, so you saying that has made me think, because I'm a recovering perfectionist. And I know, I'm curious, do you know if the research bears out that people who sort of classify as perfectionists are more likely to end up experiencing burnout? Is there any research that shows that?
So it does sound familiar. I've read a lot of articles, so not one stands out to me. But yes, and it makes sense anecdotally, because if you think about it, perfectionism is going to require you to have a sense of control over your circumstances, the things that you're focused on. And the more you want it to look a certain way, the more you're going to put in a lot of time and effort and energy into seeing it that way. And so with perfectionists, I would say, get really clear on what is your priority, apply the 80-20 principle. What is the 20% of that project that's going to yield 80% of the results. And what is it that only you can do? And we think that only we can do a whole bunch of things, but that's not true.
Exactly. I know. And being a perfectionist is so draining because you can't let go of anything. It's like, and no matter what realm of your life you're in, it's like everything you're doing suddenly, or not suddenly, but always has to be perfect. And it's just like, oh no. I mean, it just cannot, like, it cannot be like that. Like you said, like you have to pick off some things and say, you know what, if it's a C, good enough is good enough. Let it go. Like, I can't hold on to all these things. It's just, it's overwhelming, right? It starts to just like weigh you down.
Yeah. I would suggest just being more intentional of everything you do. When you say yes to something, you're automatically saying no to something else. And naps and Netflix do count. It's a part of self-care.
Yes.
We didn't even touch about on that, but it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. If you're going to show up as your best, lead others to do the same, you have to take care of yourself first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of that boundary piece, right? Like I actually started just on my schedule, putting on things for me that I know that I need. Like I'm one of these people who I have to get some kind of physical exercise or I am just not good to be around. I mean, yes, physical exercise is good for my physical health, but actually for me, it's more like 80% for my mental health and for everybody who has to deal with me day in, day out. And so I just started putting like, hey, I'm working out here and I'm going to treat that like it's an appointment, like we're doing this interview. I'm going to give it the same weight as if I had a client call, as if I had a podcast interview, as if, I have a conference call later. It has the same weight on my calendar and it's not going to be canceled unless there is some, unforeseen mitigating circumstance, emergency, whatever. But then that would also apply to all my other appointments, right? And so I totally agree with you, having like carving out that time and really respecting it for yourself, that self-care, whatever it is for you, the Netflix, the nap for me, go do some kind of workout, like that is crucial to maintaining your own sense of just, okay, everything in the world is okay. And so I can deal with everybody else once I've taken care of what I need.
Exactly. And just to, add a little bit more of that is we have the best intentions and we say, okay, I will get to it starting Monday. I'm going to work out an hour every single day. And I'm like, slow down. You're going from 0 to 100. That's setting yourself up for failure. Right. And so for high achievers, we want to just go all in. And so just start small and build up until it becomes part of your day-to-day routine, a habit, a non-negotiable.
Exactly. And really good point. A very good point, because if you go sort of like, okay, it's all or nothing, I'm doing it every day or I'm not doing it all. Now you just actually kind of set yourself up for failure, right? Like we can't just start a huge new habit and expect that we're going to be perfect. Here comes the perfectionism again at it. We got to, you got to ease into it and give yourself, a little self-compassion if it doesn't work out. Second day you miss it and you're like, oh, I already failed. No, it's a new thing. So what? Get back on the horse tomorrow. It's all good,
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Dr. Lizette, you have shared so many like nuggets of wisdom. I mean, not just sort of, you've given us the research that backs up all of this, but you've also given everyone really actionable items that they can do to manage and deal with, whether it's imposter syndrome or burnout or even self-care, as we just touched on. I mean, especially for, dealing with the imposter syndrome, recognizing it and then allowing those feelings to just be what they are, not trying to push them away. And then, the breathing. You're so right about that, how crucial that is, and how people just like, they don't pay attention because it's just breathing. Like, hello, it's breathing. Like it should be more complicated. No, actually it's not. Deep belly breaths are like life-changing. So the breathing, and then as you said, having, something that you say to yourself, knowing your strengths so that you can talk yourself through that experience. And I love the power pose because I'd forgotten about that, but that has tons of research behind it that shows us that if we do that power pose, we actually feel so much more capable and ready to take on whatever challenge happens. So these are all just, I mean, as always, they're simple steps, but the simple steps are the most effective and the most powerful. So thank you so much for sharing those today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah. So what if, and I know they will want to, what if, our listeners want to get more of all your amazing stuff? How can they get in touch with you? How can they connect with you further?
Yeah. So I like to hang out on LinkedIn. So you can just look me up there. I also have a website. It's called thriveminds.co. And you can learn more about me there as well.
I love it. Thriveminds.co. And then on LinkedIn, spell your name for us.
Lizetteojeda.
Wonderful. Okay, perfect. So everybody can find you on there too. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you again for being on. We're going to wrap up here for now. I wish we could continue this episode forever. And of course we will. We'll talk offline. But thank you everyone, our listeners, for joining us for this episode. If you have positive leadership stories to share, or you have questions about this week's topics on burnout and imposter syndrome, just drop me a line at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. I always love to hear from you, and I'm always here for you to answer your questions or get them answered by Dr. Lizette and our other guests that are on the show. As always, I want to thank you for being part of the positive leadership movement and for inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.